been so long, I can't remember why I got in this game.
What's up, brother?
What's happening? Thanks for joining us, allowing us to do this little interview with you. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thanks for having me.
Taking
Thanks
the
for having me,
time.
brother.
Um, well, let's start off at the beginning. It's been what, 20 years, over 20 years now since you kicked off your music career. Can you share a
Yeah,
little bit about your background and how you got started in music?
sure. So my father is a guitar player, and every year we would take a vacation to Destin, Florida, and to help offset the cost of that vacation, he would book a gig down there. When I was 5.5 years old, um, Back to the Future had just played on TBS, and I saw Marty McFly sing Johnny Be Good. And my dad had, it's now mine, but had a Gibson uh, 335 cherry red, just like Marty McFly played. And I don't know what it was about that song, but it just grabbed my attention, and I was singing the hook over and over and over again. And my dad said, "You want to learn that song, son?" I said, "Yeah." So the next day, he brought the lyrics home, taught them to me. I memorized them pretty quickly, and then he started playing, and I started singing in key. He said, "Let's do it again." And the second time, on the second verse, he modulated up a half step, and I followed him. And then he modulated up on the third verse again, and I followed him again. And so he was pretty well convinced that I had the ear to do it, and put me on stage on that trip to Destin. Um, from there, I was kind of his roadie on occasion in various bands that he played in. And when I was his roadie, I would get up and sing Johnny Be Good with whatever band he was in. And that was kind of my only exposure to music, to professional music. I figured it just didn't dawn on me that I could one day be a full-time musician. My only experience with it was guys that did it on the side. And so I figured that's exactly what would happen to me. Around 9, I started playing guitar. And by 12 or so, I think I was starting to write. And after high school, I took a job as a music minister at a church about 45 minutes from my home. And I didn't get paid for that position. I was given free room and board. So I got a job as a grass man. I cut grass for a living. And over the course of those 2 years after high school, my dad and I would occasionally play shows, but especially that second year, it kind of dwindled down to almost nothing. I got a call from a guy named Ross Dupre, who managed a band in Lafayette called Jive Sister Fanny, and he called me up to open for him. And I hadn't played in forever, so I figured I would just play all my songs in chronological order. And unbeknownst to me, the new sushi restaurant up the street was owned by a woman that had spent her career in the music business in independent radio promo on the West Coast, and had done really well. All of her employees were telling her she should come see me sing. She missed my set, but showed up late, and so I pulled her out to the parking lot and played her 3 songs that I had written. She gives me her phone number. I give her mine, and she called me about a week later saying, "I'm going to fly you to Los Angeles." I landed in LA for the first time on January 27th of 2002. And she had enough stroke in the business to just call CEOs of DreamWorks and Warner Brothers and Universal on the way to their offices. And they opened the door for her. So I would sit down and play these 3 songs, the same ones that I played for her. And I found out that my high school sweetheart was pregnant for my first son the day before I was supposed to come home from that trip. I figured she would lose interest once she found out that I was having a kid. And so I came home and I told my parents that we were pregnant and that Leah was probably going to lose interest. None of the labels out there really bit. I didn't have much to show. I didn't have a record. I didn't have ticket sales, so they weren't very interested in signing an unknown like me. I called up Leah. I told my parents that Leah was probably going to lose interest. My dad said, "Well, look, I'll produce the record for you." Well, I called up Leah and I said, "Hey, thanks for flying me out there, but my dad's going to make a record for me." And she says, "Okay, let's do it." And what she meant was she's going to fund the record. She's going to create a record label for its release, and she's going to fly in a producer friend of hers, a guy named Marshall Altman. Uh, by the time that album dropped in September of 2002, about 7 days after my son was born, I had generated enough interest in the industry. I had signed with a management firm out of New York that had some pretty good stroke in the industry. They had co-managed John Mayer for a while. So I had generated enough interest that Island Def Jam sent Diana Fragnito from the A&R department down to my CD release party. And she was pretty well convinced that it was time for me to go to New York to meet the New York crew. Flew me out there, and I showcased for Leor Cohen and everybody else there at SIR. They stepped outside the room and all agreed that they should sign me, and the rest is history.
That's fantastic. Thank you for all that background. That's so interesting and amazing. You and I kind of cut our teeth around the same time. Sounds like I ended up in Los Angeles about the year 2000, graduated college and ended up out there. And I was I was a documentary filmmaker trying to make my way in LA.
Gotcha.
And so that was fun. But I went through your videos on your YouTube channel and saw I think the earliest one up there was 2003.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You look much different now than you did back then.
I sure did.
In a good way, in a positive way, but seeing that kid now, like, and where you are now in your career, do you look back? Do you have would you say anything to that kid,
I'd kick his ass. I'd whip his ass. He was a moron and so full of himself. Yeah, he needed to be humbled.
Just thought you could get out to LA. I mean, I'm sure as I did, I was going to be the next best director,
I thought I was going to be bigger than Michael Jackson, in all honesty. I was disabused of that notion when I got to see Prince perform live and realized just how much better he was than me. And that was probably the most humbling experience of my life, was witnessing Prince perform. I thought when I signed to Island Def Jam, I was convinced that if I just listened to the label and listened to management and listened to the guys in my band, that everything would work out, that I would be a huge success. It really wasn't until 2011 that I showed zero income and had to kind of restructure the entire organization, strip it back down to a three-piece band, play much smaller rooms, to really build everything back up. And the way we did it was I had to lock in. I had to engage in my own career. Prior to that, I was a rudderless ship, just kind of going wherever the winds blew. It wasn't until an album called A Life Worth Living that I really locked in and started directing my own career, and realized that if I wasn't carrying the football, nobody was going to carry it for me. And so, luckily, over the last decade or so, we've managed to right the ship and get really focused on the mission at hand.
Very cool. So, I mean, you mentioned Prince. Obviously, I'm sure your dad is a big influence in your music and on your career. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, he's really a jazz player. He's a jazz fusion guy, and they don't have vocals in that music. So most days growing up, he was listening to stuff like Chick Corea and the Yellow Jackets and Weather Report, which was, as a young singer, is kind of almost torturous. Uh, but occasionally he would have to learn a song, or he would just get in the mood and he would put something else on, like Otis Redding or James Taylor. And man, I'd come running from the back. And so his early influence on me musically is always left an indelible mark. Uh, he showed me Stevie Wonder, he showed me James Taylor, and those two guys, I would say, were my biggest influences until about high school, when I was headed to the mall with my dad. We listened to the radio, and Brian McKnight's "One Last Cry" came on, and that was the first time I'd ever heard Brian McKnight, and I immediately fell in love with his music. We, like I said, we were on the way to the mall. I had my own money by that point. It was about 12 or 13, and I went into the store and bought that album. That was the first album I ever bought with my own money. Uh, I was heavily influenced by uh, Boyz II Men as well. Loved Boyz II Men. But I love Brian McKnight so much that the kids in middle school called me Brian McWhite. Uh, but Stevie was always there, right? Stevie's kind of the through thread. And it wasn't until about 19 or so that I discovered Donny Hathaway and realized just how influential he had been on Stevie, and just absolutely adored his voice. And I knew at the moment that I heard it, I was like, that's what I want to sound like. So I would say Donnie is probably my biggest influence.
Very cool. Um, can you talk about a little bit about regionally? You know, obviously you're from Louisiana, but you spent a lot of time in Nashville as well, and then kind of bringing it to Savannah, because we are a Savannah-based radio station. But these different regions, when you play in different regions, do you find that shapes your music, or that you find influence in what you may play?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even the day of the week can determine what the set list is going to look like. Tuesdays are much different than Saturdays. Um, I think, the regional music from where I live has not been very influential on me. I'm much more influenced by the stuff coming out of Macon, stuff coming out of Memphis, stuff coming out of Motown. So getting to play for different audiences around the world is has been it's been really eye opening, because for years I would say to friends, I would say, like, I would ask them a question like, if aliens landed right now and offered you a trip across the universe, but you couldn't never come back, would you do it? And they would all say, whatever. I say, I would definitely do it. Until a buddy of mine said to me, man, come on, that's nonsense. I said, no, I'm telling you, I'd do it. And he says, bro, all the traveling you do, where's the one place you want to come back to? And I realized just how right he was. Getting to see the world has showed me just how special the South is. Um, I've walked the streets of Savannah with my wife. All of the art in my house is from Savannah. Uh, we've done ghost tours. It's probably the one place that reminds me most of home. You know, I love Savannah.
Um, and that actually segues real well into another question, which is, you are a bit of a road dog,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I mean, I can look at your tours all the way from when you started out back in 2003, all the way till, recent. And man, you're on the road a lot. You
Yeah.
are. So I mean, what do you love about the open road?
Well, especially now that my wife gets to travel with me more. She's been out probably about 85% of the time over the last 3 or 4 years. Um, I just enjoy walking. I don't live in a place that's very walkable. You got to get in the car to go somewhere here, especially in Europe. We can just walk for hours and talk and fall in love again. It's it's amazing to see the world and to get to eat amazing food all over the place. There are places that you have to try to have a bad meal in. And as a South Louisiana native, food is definitely high up on the list of priorities for me. Good food is. So yeah, man, I enjoy getting like my mom a couple of Mother's Days ago uh, said to me that she had never been to Hawaii and she had always wanted to go to Hawaii. So I called my manager and said, book me and my dad a show in Hawaii, and flew my mom and dad and my wife out there with us. To be able to like just do that on a whim is pretty special. And not like to be able to do it on a whim and earn money is pretty special.
Great. Um, while you've been touring in the course of your career, you've worked with some, the list is incomparable of all the different bands that you've toured with over the years. I mean, from the ones I wrote down: Maroon 5, Dave Matthews, Sarah Bareilles, Foo Fighters, and the list goes on and on. Is there one that you love or that you were able to collaborate with, and why?
Well, I got to sing every night with Bonnie Raitt when we were on tour with her, and that was pretty special. Singing Love Sneaking Up on You every night on tour with Bonnie is like a very, very serious high point for me. Um, I got to sit in with the original Meters a few years ago during Jazz Fest, which was probably one of the coolest things that I'll ever do. And really special for me because, New Orleans is 2 hours to the west of here. And I remember being a kid talking to my dad about singers from here. And he told me that the guys from my neck of the woods had a really hard time when they would try to go to New Orleans, and sometimes they get run out of town. So for me to get asked to be the only guest on the show, by the way, the only non-member, non-former member of the band, Cyril Neville was the only other guest, but he was in the Meters. I was the only other guest that was never in the band, and it's also probably one of the coolest things that I'll ever do. So yeah, and that art's dead now, so that'll never happen again.
Hmm. Um, let's see. Uh, so speaking of Jazz Fest, you've come to the Savannah Music Festival quite a few
Mhm.
times, and you kind of mentioned it a little before, but can you talk a little bit about the show that you did with your dad back in 2017, and will we see you back again for the music festival anytime soon?
That's a good question. I have no idea. Uh, I hope so though. Um, getting to play with my dad is one of my favorite things about my job. Not only do I get to pay him really, really well, and because I was a tough kid, uh, and they, laid out quite a bit of money for me over the years. So to be able to repay that is definitely something that I cherish. But I get to share the stage with my father, and we kind of have a sort of rapport with each other that that comes across in a big way. It's, I think, very, very special for my fans as well. They adore my father, and he adores them right back. I remember we got off stage one time, and he says, "Man, what a great crowd! I can't wait to go meet them." And he meant it. He wanted to meet everybody in that room. There were 200 people, and he was going to spend all night long talking to them. So, I pray that my dad and I can come back for the music fest and put on a, because I think the show is probably better now than it's ever been. The show that he and I do.
Um, Switching gears a little bit, how would you describe like your sound? I've heard you've been described as the king of Bayou Soul. Um, but to someone who's never really heard your music before.
I just generally tell people that it's rhythm and blues. That kind of conveys exactly what we're trying to do. But it's varied. It's quite varied. I especially earlier in my career, uh, I would have a pretty wide variety of styles on an album. My first album could rightly be called Schizophrenic. Uh, I'm sort of locking in a little more now. Um, my latest album is probably the most coherent of my career. Um, and I'm moving into more of the blues. I just got out of the studio with Bonamassa, making another blues album. He and I put one out, a charity album, in 23, but this would be an all original blues album, and I think that's probably where I'm going to be moving more towards in the future.
Very cool. It's been a while since you've put out an album of original music. Um, so why now?
Well, the pandemic really put the kibosh on a lot of the work that I had planned. My plan starting in 2020 was to make an album a year. That obviously didn't come to fruition. I wrote all the material for the latest album in 2020, in March of 2020. It just took until last year to finally pull it all together. But working with Joe and his team has shown me just how much fun playing the blues is, and and Joe obviously has a massive audience that I'm very grateful that he's opened up for me. He's kind of walked me right in the front door, and I'm also kind of convinced through Joe and his team that there's really nobody in the blues quite like me. There are really no more stand-up blues singers, or at least no new stand-up blues singers. All of the guys doing it in the blues are guitar slingers. So I'm hoping that I can work out a little niche in my corner of the world.
What can your fans expect from Time as a Thief?
This tour is all about the new album. So you're going to hear a lot of material off the new album. You'll obviously hear staples from my career, songs like Home and Lonely Night in Georgia and a handful of others. But the focus is primarily on Time as a Thief. So Bring Your Dancing Shoes is going to get gritty and funky.
Like that. Do you have one song off the album, off Time as a Thief that you feel strongly about
Oh
more than
yeah.
others, and why?
Yeah, Give You the World is probably one of the best songs that I've ever released. Um, I wrote it back in like 2018, uh, and immediately my wife and daughters were like, "I love that song." It's a song that I feel very, very. It kind of conveys everything that I want to about my wife and my love for her. and it's a pretty good display of what I do vocally. Um, it's one of the better displays of what I do vocally.
Probably an easy subject to work to write about. Your
Yeah, no doubt about it.
it can be easy or difficult depending on your relationship or maybe just the time. Um, uh, let's see. Let's talk about um, let's talk about your SOS projects. Where you're not just making music, you're really trying to make a difference. Can you talk about your work through the SOS Foundation?
Yeah, yeah. So, I was on major labels for the first half of my career, and as such, I never saw a dime from record sales. Those dollars went to keep the lights on in office buildings in New York and LA. So when I went independent, that revenue stream was going to be coming my way. And I figured it ought to go to keep the lights on for people that actually need to keep their lights on. And it took some convincing for management. They were not convinced that we should be giving money away, that they were pretty well convinced that we shouldn't be giving money away because I was so poor. Um, but I knew that it was the right thing to do. And I wanted to build philanthropy into my business. I wanted to make it automatic. And the the benefits that came out of it were so much more. The best part about it is raising money for charitable causes that I'm passionate about. The next best thing is that it gives me more time in between original records to write better material. So the material for my original records is stronger as a result. But I also get to keep putting music out for the fans. I don't starve the fans of any music. Um, the fans also have more of an incentive to actually purchase something at merch. In an era where record sales are virtually non-existent, my fans always leave the show with something in hand because they know that it's going to a good cause. So we managed to raise tens of thousands of dollars, excuse me, tens of thousands of dollars for a variety of causes. We're gonna actually go into the studio as soon as this run is over to record SOS 5. And I get to record some of my favorite music ever. So it's really a win across the board, and it's been wildly successful.
That's fantastic. Um, that's really all I have for the most part. You know, I guess that I have a couple other questions. Have you faced any major challenges along the way? I feel like you kind of spoke about
Oh
this,
yeah,
and or is there anything you'd like to discuss, and how'd you overcome it?
yeah. You know, the real challenge at the beginning of my career was just not being focused at all, and assuming that if I just showed up, everything would work out. That was the biggest challenge. Arrogance was the biggest challenge. Like that's a really arrogant way to go through life. It's just all I got to do is show up and do my thing, and everything's going to be hunky dory. So it was humility. I think I was humbled by life and humbled by the fact that I wasn't selling tickets, humbled by the fact that I was broke and really needed a wake up call. And so um, I just, I kind of had a bit of a come to Jesus moment where I basically, realized that for my entire career, I thought that the Faustian deal, the selling your soul at the crossroads was real. That if you could summon if I tried to summon the forces of darkness, that they would show up. And what I realized was that I had never thought similarly about the inverse. That I never thought that if I summoned the forces of good, that good things would come about. And in that moment, I literally looked to the sky and I said, Lord, I'm yours. Do with me what you will. And I entered a period of what I call unsustainable elation. It was like 2.5 years of just pure joy that I really didn't feel comfortable with. You know, I was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop and for something to go wrong. And nothing did. It would be minor things that would go wrong. And luckily, the Lord has shown me time and again that I really don't need to worry, that I need to trust. And so that's what I do.
That's amazing. So you're playing here, Victory North. When are you going to get to spend any time in town, or you guys are coming in and coming out?
That's a good question. What date are we playing? 16.
16. I know it was right around those teams.
We only got to go to Charleston on the 18th, so we
Okay.
have an off day on the 17th. I may try to convince my tour manager to just hang out in Savannah.
I was going to say, so if you guys are hanging out, where's a fan's best chance to have a beer or hang out with Marc?
Whatever's closest to the bus.
So the downstairs hotel bar, basically.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, and can't wait to see you when you're here.
Yes, sir. See you soon.
All right,
Only want a chance just to feed our family.